Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our next spring Teams live session to update you on our activities at UVM. I don't need to say that it has been a challenging spring, and we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. We know it's been hard for everybody, and we want to acknowledge that, and we want to take time to talk through some of these issues. Those of you who have been joining us for these UVM Strong sessions know we have a pretty typical format, and we're going to switch from that a little bit tonight, just so that we can make sure that we cover these topics in a way that addresses the information and what you want to hear from us. We're going to spend some time talking about the data and explaining to you some of the decisions based on the data that we made over the last couple weeks. We want to give you an update on information about COVID-19. We want to talk about some accountability measures that we've put in place. We want to talk about mental health, which many of you have raised in recent emails and correspondences to us, and something that we take very seriously and something that we've been working hard to attend to make sure that everyone is safe and doing well. We want to talk about academics, about the exciting news that we sent earlier this week about our plans for fall 2021, plans for registration for fall, but also summer. And we also want to talk about housing and the upcoming plans for the rest of this semester and how you go about room selection, other important topics. And then we want to share with you some exciting things that we have put in place related to some student experience that we have plans. Next slide, please. We are here for a number of reasons, and we're in this together, and we have been standing at a fork in the road right now for the last couple of days. We want to acknowledge that we have made some missteps, and we have been trying very hard since this all started a year ago when we first made that decision, which we acknowledged earlier last week, to transition to remote. But we have been trying very hard, and it's been great that we have been working together with you. And we want to share some information tonight with you in full transparency, the data that tells our current story at UVM. And we need to ask for your continued support so that we can maintain in-person instruction, residential life experience, activities and events on campus, and to keep our UVM and our Vermont communities safe. The last few weeks have been challenging. I've mentioned that before, and I want to reiterate that. And we've received many good points of suggestions. And one of the things that I'm reminded is that while we might disagree and why we might have tough times, we are all in for this, the common goal, and that is to provide a healthy and safe experience for everyone here at UVM. Next slide. I'm reminded of a phrase we used early on, which was rally together. And I just want to remind us that we, the students, the faculty, staff, families, and our colleagues across the state of Vermont, we're all in this together. And it's in this spirit tonight that we're going to be sharing with you some data, answering some of the more frequently asked questions that you've been raising, and provide some horizons of hope that we think are pointing to. On to the next slide. I want to remind folks that we operate under some very specific guidelines in Vermont. Vermont has been recognized nationally for its leadership in responding to COVID-19. We are currently operating under an executive order that was issued by Governor Phil Scott. And I might point out that Governor Scott is a proud alum of UVM. But that's an executive order that he issued last spring that we are still operating under. We're also operating under direct guidance and direction of the Vermont Department of Health. And while there may be many things that we would like to do, we have to vet those with the Vermont Department of Health and get approval before we can advance them. The Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and I might add the head of that agency has a student at UVM, also contains a lot of information about travel quarantine and restrictions about that we also have to operate under. The other thing is that the state issued over the summer, and it's been updated regularly, most recently on March 12th, a document called the Safe and Healthy Return to Campus Mandatory Guidelines for College and University Learning. These are the various things that UVM has to operate under. And while we may want to do things differently, and while many of you come from different states and you may experience things differently, these are what we are operating under. Next slide, please. You've seen in recent correspondences information about where we're at currently at UVM. When we started the semester, Vermont saw a spike in COVID-19 cases in the state and in particular in Chittenden County. UVM also saw a spike in positive cases since February 1 when we returned it. We also know, and it was confirmed both in the wastewater treatment, but also by the Vermont Department of Health, that the more contagious variants of COVID-19 are confirmed in Chittenden County. And we should, and Dr. Bavola will mention this, we should operate on the assumption that it is part of our community. We also saw an increase in social gatherings on campus and off campus that were creating risk of spread. We also increased students who tested positive for COVID-19 had symptoms, and that was really concerning, and that's not something that we saw last fall. Next slide, please. I want to share with you some data as a point of comparison from last fall to this spring. So as you look on the left columns on the bar graphs, I have the first 6 weeks of both fall semester and spring semester. And the dark orange ones are the off-campus positive students, the number of off-campus positive students we had, compared to the yellow ones were the on-campus students. And you can see even that in our highest week, the first week of the semester, we had a total of 10. The next bar, the green column, is the off-campus students this spring, and the blue part of the bar are the on-campus students. And you can see that during week 3, we reported over 60 cases combined between our on and our off-campus. You can see we dropped during week 4, and we held steady on week 5. But if you compare again to our fall numbers, we only had 1 or 2 cases those weeks. But unfortunately, this week, we're beginning to see an uptake in cases again. Next slide, please, and I want to turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Gary. So good evening. As a physician, I use evidence-based medicine to help guide my clinical decisions. And we have done the same with COVID. So I want to share with you some more data that we've been monitoring to inform our COVID response. And on this slide, you see a table that compares some of our COVID data from the first 6 weeks of fall with data from the first 6 weeks of the spring semester. If we look at the numbers as the fall semester got underway, on that left side of the screen, we see relatively low numbers of student cases each week. There's 4, then 7, 4, 5, 3, 2, and 1. Not bad. Now, when we compare those numbers to the numbers of cases in the spring semester, which is on the right side, we see 20 student cases as the population of UVM was growing, with on-campus students arriving to the residential halls and off-campus students returning to Burlington. Then the number of cases starts to climb, and we have a week with 28 student cases, then 46, and then 59 student cases in 1 week. Along with an increased number of cases, we were also seeing an increased number of close contacts, and many of those close contacts were testing positive. And you can see in this table that this is something we hardly saw in fall. But spring semester, we had a week where 40% of the close contacts tested positive. So we had increased cases, increased transmission. We had concerning indicators and needed to respond. Back to you, Gary.
Next slide, please. I want to bring you back to the slide that highlights the numbers for the first 6 weeks of spring semester. And again, you can see during the week of February 15th, we saw that climb to where we had 62 over 60 positive cases on campus. I added across the bottom there a couple of key points that I want to talk about. At the end of the first week of February was the Super Bowl, and we know that as part of Super Bowl, there were a couple of social gatherings on campus that occurred where there was a student who tested positive that resulted in several other students testing positive. Following the week of February 15th, we realized that our quarantine space was quickly reaching capacity. We never reached capacity, but we were heading in that direction, and we needed to make a decision. And I want to express my deep appreciation to the residents of Mercy Hall. We informed them on a Sunday evening that we decided that we needed to create more space for quarantine on campus, and we informed them that we were going to relocate them to other places on campus. They stepped up. I'm really proud of how they responded and what they did to make it more available for us to have space to quarantine people on campus. Fortunately, the next week, our numbers dropped. Later that week, I announced the change in sanctioning, as well as our decision to begin testing twice weekly. Immediately after that meeting the next day, Provost Prelak and I had a meeting with the governor's office. In that meeting, they expressed significant concern about what was going on at UVM with the number of positive cases. They praised us all fall term for what we were doing, but this term they expressed significant concerns about where we were heading and expressed that we needed to get this in place and resolved, or we may need to consider going remote. So we implemented those decisions about the sanctioning and about testing, but just prior to the governor telling us. As you can see, those numbers continued to hold steady, and this past week, particularly amongst our off-campus students, those numbers have gone up. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have seen and seen repeatedly is that gatherings spread the virus. So in our messaging around campus and our communications to everyone, we have encouraged that people avoid social gatherings. Now, that may seem to be a little bit of a disconnect because we talk about classes, we talk about programs on campus, but it's in those gatherings where people take associated risk. They're not wearing masks. They're not physically distant. They're not 6 feet apart. And they're taking those risks that make those gatherings even more risky situations for the spread of virus. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Gary. Our public health strategy has been working to help slow the spread of COVID, and we need to continue using the same interventions we have been. Testing frequently, every 3 days, it's going to help us get ahead of this virus. Getting people who test positive into isolation and their contacts into quarantine works, and the more quickly we do this, the better. So engaging honestly and openly in contact tracing is critical. By now, most of you have heard about B.1.1.7, the variant, the SARS-CoV-2 variant that is spreading across the country and continues to be found in wastewater in Burlington. The mutations this variant has have enabled the virus to bind more strongly to your cells, so leading to a much greater chance of the virus taking over that cell's machinery to make your cells a factory for virus. So this translates into a more contagious virus that we are finding also causes more symptoms and often has a shorter incubation period. We all need to act like it's here. You just don't know if you have the variant when you're sick, and if most of your friends you gather with are going to get it, even someone who might get really sick. So act as if it's here. On a brighter note, the COVID-19 vaccine is here, and it will get to our population soon. We don't know exactly when or how, but we will actively support the state's vaccination plan. And now I'm going to introduce a new format for this UVM Strong presentation. We're doing something a little different. We've been reading your FAQs, and we have included many of these questions with our answers in some of our slides coming up. So next slide. Why is it okay to eat with a friend, but we can't hang out in our room? Well, the answer is the dining halls have been designed to maintain 6 feet of physical distancing, and they are monitored by dining hall staff. Your rooms are not, and so there's more ability to kind of break that physical distancing rule. Next slide. Are students catching COVID while in quarantine? There is no evidence that this is occurring. Of over 700 students who have been in quarantine so far this semester, we know of 4 that tested positive after day 7 in quarantine, which is still within the 2 to 14 incubation period of the virus. A few of them tested positive on day 10, so that's still within that incubation period. The virus just took a little longer to incubate in these students. Next slide. Can a family member who meets Vermont travel guidelines visit their off-campus student. This one's easy. Yes. Now we'll hear from Erica. Next slide.
Thanks, Michelle. My name is Erica Calero. I'm the Interim Vice Provost for Student Affairs, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about how we hold ourselves accountable for the promise we each made to keep each other safe and healthy. This is the green and gold promise. As you saw just now, we had serious cause for concern. We made an effort to underscore the need for compliance through elevated sanctions. However, this was the wrong approach for our student body. And our sanctioning levels now look more like they looked during the fall semester. In correcting our course, we have reviewed all final conduct decisions, made adjustments, and we're notifying students. While it's still the case that serious sanctions can result from serious violations of the green and gold promise, I want to underscore the basics of that central and effective pledge that we make to each other and that we uphold every time we wear a mask, give each other 6 feet of space, and gather in safe and structured places. Gatherings remain a concern because, as you have heard time and again, we've seen the virus spread through unsafe gatherings. They can be as simple as 4 or 5 friends unmasked in a res hall room. We are considering amending the guest policy in res hall rooms. We are watching the data closely, and the data will guide us to know when that will be safe. In the meantime, though, there are many safe ways and places to be together, and I encourage students to take advantage of these. We'll explore some of those in a few minutes. But now we want to answer a few more questions. So next slide, and Raf, on to you.
Good evening, folks. My name is Rafael Rodriguez, the Executive Director of Residential Life, and some folks have had some questions with respect to housing that I'm hoping to clarify for anyone who may be wondering. So the first question we got, or one of the questions we received, was, can 2 students, non-roommates, gather on campus for a game of cards? And the answer is, of course they can. While not in their particular rooms, they can always gather in common area, in your lounges found on your floor, in the hallways of your residence halls, even in the tents that we have outside in the Davis Center, for example. So there are many opportunities and spaces for folks to gather, to play card games, to connect, to interact, to catch up. While your residential room is not one of those, as Erica mentioned, there are tons of space across campus where you can do that. So let's take another question. Next slide. Can I stand in the doorway of a residential hall room and speak to the room's occupants? You can stand in the doorway. You can also stand in the hallway, connect with folks and talk to folks. We're just going to ask the folks keep their masks on, particularly if one resident's in the room and one is out. That is absolutely allowed. It's not something it's not a violation or a breaking of the green and gold promise. And we actually encourage folks to be doing that, to be connected with one another. Next slide. Is it true that residential life staff were supposed to be writing up more students? And the answer to this is absolutely not. Actually, we prefer to not write up anyone. It's not anything we enjoy to do. Our default approach and the way we love to engage with you all is through programming, through getting to know you, through engaging and building connections and learning what you enjoy about your experience here and learning about what we can improve about your experience here. Documentation is not one of the things we like to do. And at no point was staff asked to increase the number of documentations happening. What we did find was that those gatherings that Gary talked about and Michelle talked about that are concerning were happening in a few specific areas at a high volume, enough to be of concern. So we had a bit more staff presence to support the RA response, but broadly across campus, no, there was not an expectation that there was any more documentation. There was also not an increase in number of documentations across the entire campus. So I'm happy I was able to answer some of those questions. Next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Erica.
Thank you. All right, our next question is, will I be suspended for a first offense of the green and gold promise? Generally, no, but if the behavior we see is especially egregious, suspension may be an outcome. Next slide, please. Will I get suspended for going to the bathroom without a mask on or if my mask slips down? Again, no, but you could be referred for a conduct review. Next slide. This one's tough, I think, for some students. I don't want my friends to get suspended, but they're gathering and not following the green and gold promise. I know it can be a challenge to have conversations with friends, but I am equally sure, students, that you can do it. I know that you want to be here with your friends, with your faculty, and I know that having a conversation about safe behavior is well within your ability. And listen, we're here to help. You can reach out to your RA, to your advisor, to any of us, really, and we'll work through it together. You can do this. For the next slide, back over to Gary.
Can I ride in a car with someone who is not my roommate or my housemate? It depends. I wish I could give you a very simple black and white answer to this. And I know recently there was a case involving a situation where students were written up for being in a car. So let me give you a rather complex answer to this question. If you strictly follow state guidelines, you're mixing two households. And it currently is very clearly defined that we should not be mixing households. Now, I know for a fact that all last semester and up until this one incident, people were riding in cars together. Are you wearing masks? Are you doing it safely? Are you spending long times in those cars? So think about the decisions you're making, and that will help you inform the level of risk that you are taking there. It's also important to note that police services, RAs, other people on campus are not patrolling cars and looking for people in violations. The best way I could compare it to is if you're driving in a car and I don't have my seatbelt on, most police officers will not pull me over for that. But if I'm speeding and I get pulled over, I may get a speeding ticket, but I may also get a citation for not wearing my seatbelt. So if our police respond to a vehicle, it's often because there's other situations that are involved. Maybe there's an alcohol violation or there's a drug violation that's involved in there. And as a result of their investigation, they see that there are people unmasked in a car. So it's not an easy answer, but I would say assess your risk as you think about taking it. And now I want to turn it over to John Paul.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. My name is John Paul Grogan. I'm one of the directors in the Center for Health and Wellbeing, and I currently work with our teams at CAPS and in Living Well. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about mental health, and as others have said, it's been a particularly challenging semester as we near this one-year mark of dealing with COVID. And the impact it has had on our lives and the UVM experience has taken a toll on mental health for all of us, really. And many of us are needing additional support. And so it feels important for me as a mental health provider to offer this as context, as a way to normalize pieces of the experience that many of you are having. So tonight I want to take a few minutes to highlight what the counseling experiencing looks like on campus, and to remind you of some of the resources that may be helpful to students who are in need of immediate support. We can go to the next slide. So I was asked to speak really specifically to what it's like to access counseling and psychiatry services, or CAPS. And so I'll start for those who are not familiar or who haven't used our services before. When you call us or when you reach out to us, our goal really is to have you speak with a counselor on that day. And we call this a triage appointment, and it happens over the phone. And really, we use this appointment to learn about what's going on for you, and to talk about what resources may best support you, fully knowing that if we aren't the best fit, it's our plan to work with you to determine what other resources may be helpful, whether these are on campus or in the Burlington community. From this initial triage call, about 80% of students choose to go on to see further appointments at CAPS. And what that looks like varies from student to student. For that next appointment, for many students, it happens within the same day or the next day. I can confidently say for most students that next follow-up appointment happens within about a week. From here, students work with counselors to determine the frequency of appointments and how they use CAPS. And I know that this looks very different based on the individual student. Some students might have a few appointments during a brief period of time of several weeks. Some students may choose to check in with a counselor a few times across the duration of the semester. A couple of other things I'd want to mention here If you've seen us before and it's been a while, the best way to get back in touch with us is to give our office a call, and our schedulers will work with you to get you back in with that provider you last saw. It feels important to remind everyone, and we know this, but not every counselor is the best fit for every student. And if you've seen somebody before and it didn't feel right or it wasn't the best fit, we'd love to hear from you again and to support you in getting connected to a different provider. And you can simply do that by asking our schedulers when you call. I want to remind those at-home students that you would still access CAPS in the same way via telephone. We would talk with you about what services are available to you based on where you're currently located, and unfortunately this does vary state by state. And then I'll say, while I'm mostly talking about CAPS, I want to remind you of the full scope of Center for Health and Wellbeing resources, and there's a Go link on this slide that takes you to our board organizer page where all of our drop-in and educational and programmatic resources are available. And then also on there is our Center for Health and Wellbeing website, which would take you to the full menu of services and appointments that the Center for Health and Wellbeing offers. And we can go to the next slide, please. So we've had this question, I'm really struggling with my mental health, what can I do? And I want to say, first and most importantly, if you are struggling, whether that's anxiety, sadness, frustration, or stress, I want to acknowledge what you're feeling and what's going on with you right now. And as I said, we know this is a challenging and difficult time. And my recommendation is going to be simple. It's that you reach out and talk to someone who can help you make a plan to address whatever it is that's going on for you or impacting your mental health. That could be a counselor who can help you start with some mental health treatment. It could be an advisor in your dean's office who can help you address the stressful academic situation. Or it could be a peer or family member who can listen to what is going on for you and help you think about some changes you can make on your own. On this slide, I do want to provide some critical numbers. That is the CAPS telephone number. That's how you would access us during regular business hours. It's also how you access our 24/7 on-call counselor. So nights and weekends, that's the number you would use to reach out to an on-call counselor. That Go UVM webpage is also a list of resources that we have curated that includes on-campus, it includes Burlington, and it includes national resources that can support student mental health. And on that list, you'll find a menu of services that includes phone and text hotlines, a variety of apps that we like to recommend to students, and a number of web-based resources. So I will stop there, and we'll certainly be around for questions later on. And I believe I'm passing to you, Jay Dickinson.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Paul. Hi, I'm Jay Dickinson, and I'm the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Student Success. And I can't believe that we are already in week 7 of the semester. It seems like it's been going really fast. At the same time, I understand that it's been a really difficult few weeks. I see it in my students' faces, and I know that faculty really understand the challenges that you're facing this semester, and that we're all kind of trying to row in the same direction to finish the semester successfully, have a great second half of the semester, and make it through till May. And I don't know about you, I'm not a big fan of time changes, but I am really enjoying the extra sunshine in the afternoon, and it kind of makes me realize that we're almost there. We're almost to spring, and warmer days are ahead. And with that in mind, let's go to the first slide. I think for me, one of the brightest spots is that, as we announced recently, we are deep into fall planning, and we are intending to come back next fall for a fully in-person semester. And you can see that when you look at the schedule of courses. Course registration starts in just a couple of weeks on the week of April 5th. So I do recommend that you contact your academic advisor and start planning your fall schedule. We are planning almost entirely an in-person semester. 94% of our courses will be in person, and then there are some select courses that will be online or in a hybrid modality. So we do have contingency planning going on. And as soon as we receive the Vermont State reopening guidelines for higher education this summer, we'll figure out which aspects of our contingency planning we might need to put into place. But I will tell you that everything we're planning is focused on minimizing impact on student schedules. We will not be having a re-registration process in the summer. And also, we are very much focused on taking steps to maintain a very high percentage of courses with in-person instruction. So that is going to be a priority, even if we do need to make some changes. For example, if there's some social distancing requirements still in place. So you can move on to that next slide. So with the shift back to in-person instruction, we will not be able to offer the wide range of remote and mixed classes that we were able to offer this year. And those classes were really what allowed us to be able to offer that at-home option. So unfortunately, we are not planning for an at-home option this fall. If you have concerns and you feel like you might be unable to return to campus, I strongly recommend that you consult with your student services office to see what kinds of options might be possible for you, such as taking a few selected online classes or maybe getting ahead a little bit by taking a summer course this year. So next slide, please. And then on the horizon, we have some great things to look forward to. UVM has submitted a commencement plan to the state of Vermont, and we are waiting on approval for that. And we do anticipate that information about the plans for class of 21 and for your families will be sent out soon, so you can wait for that. And then there will be additional information for graduates and their families that will be shared in 2 Teams Lives events that'll be happening in late March and mid-April. So again, this information is coming. We're just in the process of finalizing plans with the state. I also want to mention that summer university registration is open. There are over 350 classes offered across the institution, except for a few lab courses. All of them are online, and so you should be able to register for a couple of classes if you like. It's a chance to catch up, a chance to get ahead, maybe fulfill a requirement, and to really feel like you're back in the groove again. So that is all that I'm going to talk about today, and I'm going to pass it off to Raf Rodriguez again to talk about residential life.
Good evening, folks. It's my privilege to spend a bit of time with you to talk about what's happening in residential life at this point. So let's move on to the next slide. Let's start talking about the housing selection process. As we talked about earlier in the semester, it is a 2-step process. The first step of the process is to complete your learning community ranking and get your learning community placement. And the second step is room selection, which we're in right now. I want to spend a little bit of time just giving an overview and a summary of our results of the first part of the process, which is your learning community ranking. And I'm excited to share that we were able to allow and make all 100% of roommate preferences and roommate pairs that were requested. So some folks requested to be in doubles or in triples or in pairs of 2s or groups of 3s. We were able to accommodate all of those, which is no small feat. So I'm glad we're able to do that. With respect to learning community choices, 91% of students got one of the top 3 choices. And I have a bit of a breakdown there so you can see the percent of folks who got their first choice, 72%, their second choice, an additional 15, and a third choice, an additional 5. So again, 91% of the student body, the returning student body, was able to get into one of their top 3 learning community choices. A pinch point in which we saw, and we just want to be transparent with the numbers and the data so that you all know what happened, is in cultural crossroads. A lot of folks ran cultural crossroads, and we see that we had a bit of capacity issues. So we had 883 students rank cultural crossroads as their first choice, but only had 422 spaces. So that mismatch in capacity to interest is what led to our numbers being in the 91% range, but I still think a great result and outcome. At the current moment, we are in the room selection process. That's a huge part of the process. It's important that everyone goes through the room selection, whether you're happy and excited about your housing placement and looking forward to next year, or whether you're thinking about exploring trading spaces. It's important that you select a room because you cannot trade a space if you're not assigned into a space. So please, 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 whether you're excited again or you are looking for a change, please participate in the room selection process. You will get an email from us shortly before you will begin selecting a room, and it's important that folks are paying attention to the email and look out for any messages we may send with instructions of how to proceed. Let's move on to the next slide. Next steps, as we think about not just housing selection for next year, but what comes after that, we will open up trading spaces between April 5th and May 7th. So anyone who currently got a housing assignment, a learning community assignment that they're not happy with, they'll be able to go and submit a trade request, and we'll be working quickly to try to resolve as many of those as possible. Also, similar to what we've done in all the breaks and last semester when we had to go fully remote, we will be offering and extending emergency housing. This time will be summer emergency housing, and that request form will open up in mid-April. Another important date that folks have been asking about, I know folks have been asking about, is move out. When is move out? Well, it'll span the week of May 13th through the 18th. Typically, it's an expectation that students are moving out of their building 24 hours after their last exam. At the latest, students will need to be out of the residence hall by May 19th at 12 noon. That is a hard deadline. Additionally, if we go on to the next slide, I want to just answer a question that we received a few emails about, not too many, but I want to make sure that we're, again, answering any questions you may have. Some folks are asking about room verifications that were happening this week. Happy to say that those are wrapped up. Those are all completed as of yesterday. What we're finding is that as some students were moving rooms, the trades from this semester, the space trades from this semester, it was taking a long time to execute those because students were entering rooms and finding that furniture was not put together or was disassembled, some pieces were missing, and or they might have found someone in their space that was not assigned to that space. So it was really slowing down the process, and what we did is we sent our maintenance team to go through and double check and confirm that rooms that were designated as empty were actually emptied, were set up with furniture. We had the appropriate person identified and placed in the room in case of an emergency. So these were not our sort of policy enforcement folks. These are our maintenance teams who went through and completed that process. And I think we are all done as of Monday. So now I'm going to hand it off.
Thanks, Raph. I want to remind us all that change is so close, and what a place to be when winter turns to spring. Students will be seeing new opportunities to connect, sometimes spontaneously, and also through the activities and organizations that are routinely accessible to all. Next slide, please. We will see more places to gather outdoors in the sun. We'll probably see students pulling their hammocks out of storage before long. As a reminder, we have a list here of opportunities that many students take advantage of, and that we would really encourage everybody who hasn't yet experimented with different kinds of clubs and organizations, campus rec activities, and so forth, to take a moment and find a new activity or a new way to engage. Tomorrow is our virtual career fair, which is fun and engaging and a great way not just for graduating seniors, but for all students to get a sense of the landscape around career development and career preparation. Our UVM board website lists literally hundreds of activities to participate in. Some are virtual, many are in person. And of course, we have lots and lots of good outdoor spaces. Again, the tents, fire pits. Indoors, we have common areas and lounges. So pop-up programming, again, opportunities for connection, hopefully some memory making and some levity, certainly some spontaneity coming very soon. I just checked the weather for the next few days, and it's going to be warming tomorrow in the 50s and this weekend in the 60s. So it's a good time to make some plans to connect outdoors safely with friends. Next slide.
So thank you, Erica. I appreciate all my presenters for the information they gave tonight. And before we turn it over to the question and answer period, I just want to remind everybody that it's up to all of us. It's up to the faculty, it's up to the staff, it's up to administrators, it's up to the family members of our students, and most importantly, it's up to our students that we can finish this semester out in person, in our classes, in our residence halls, on our campus, celebrating and loving the UVM that is so special to all of us. Now is when we really need to recommit to those measures that we know throughout this pandemic are the ones that are successful. Things like wearing facial coverings, maintaining 6-foot physical distancing, personal hygiene, committing to the twice-a-week testing through this week, and then following through. If you want to test more than once a week after that, we really want to encourage you to do that. If you're involved in contact tracing, be open and honest about that so that we can identify the people that might be at risk. And if you're in isolation or in quarantine, comply with the requirements and help us make sure that that is the right experience for you. And remember, we're in this all together, and that by rallying together as a group of catamounts, we can get through this. Next slide. We're going to open it up for question and answer at this point, but I also want to highlight that our next session is scheduled for April 15th at 7 p.m. and we'll be sending out more information about that and the link for that. So let's turn to some questions here, and I'll try to direct them to people here. Excuse me. It appears the Vermont positivity rate is very low, about 1.3%. I believe UVM's positivity rate is a fraction of that. What indeed is the risk of opening up the campus and relaxing rules? How many students and faculty have needed hospitalization for COVID? How many have died? I suspect the answer is 0. I'm going to go back to one of my earlier slides that we had up there, and it talked about what we have to follow on campus. We are looking at our guidelines and our requirements constantly to see if we can make adjustments. But let me give you one example of something we had to go to the state with last week. As we finished out our winter sports season, which are all indoor sports season, the current guidelines for state athletic programs did not allow spectators at sporting events. And as Erica just pointed out, we're entering into some nice spring weather here in Vermont. And we're having a number of our outdoor sports events, some of which normally would have competed in the fall, are competing now in the spring. And we have our usual group of spring sports that are going on right now. At the point that we went to the state, spectators, fellow students, were not allowed to sit in the stands and watch these games. They couldn't go to a soccer game. They couldn't go to a lacrosse game. We had to petition and make a request to be allowed to have spectators go to those games. I'm pleased to say that the state approved that. So when we think about relaxing guidelines and relaxing restrictions on campus, we have to weigh about whether those are restrictions that are the universities or ones that we have to follow based on state requirements. Things like travel restrictions, quarantine, are things that come from the state. But we constantly monitor and track, and as the governor makes his announcements and the Vermont Department of Health changes things, we move swiftly to make those changes in there. I am pleased to say, and Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, hospitalizations, and we have not had anybody die from COVID, and I'm so thankful for that.
That's correct.
How did the university see a rise in zero-room hangouts in certain hotspots and not recognize that those hotspots have no common spaces? There's a clear lack of consideration for the differentially styled dorm buildings and what they offer. Raf, do you want to talk a little bit about our residence halls and some of the different spaces there?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely accurate that our buildings completely range in what they have available in terms of spaces to utilize and spaces to hang out. While not every single building has floor-specific lounges, all the buildings have common area lounges and spaces that can be utilized. And specifically, that's why we brought, or Gary brought over the large tent areas that can be utilized. And I think are a bit underutilized and should be thought of as a place for folks to come together and gather, as well as dining spaces and dining areas are another space for folks to gather. So while yes, a floor lounge is not available in every single building, common area lounges and spaces are available in every single building.
So we have a number of questions about mental health issues. John Paul, do you want to comment about that?
Gary, I think I got a couple of those in the private replies, but one of them was about session limits. And so, you know, I think the key piece to remind folks is that, you know, CAPS would describe ourselves as a short-term facility, you know, that looks very different for students. You know, typically that is students receive up to 4 to 6 visits a semester with us, but also it's important to name that we make exceptions for a variety of reasons. The question was about resources available in the community. We know that can be a challenge. We explicitly have staff and systems in place to support students that are needing to make a transition to community care, and we certainly regularly make exceptions around need, such as students who may not be able to afford or be able to access care in the community. So, our goal is to be flexible and supportive of students and meeting them where they're at. So I think that addresses the questions that I saw, Gary.
Thanks. So a question came up, if the school actually cares about mental health, why will you trap students here and not allow them to take care of themselves? It's putting students in worse mental positions. Jay, do you want to talk about what a student might want to do if they are thinking about not being able to continue here?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I think if a student is really feeling like they are not able to continue on with any in-person aspects of their instruction, then if they feel like that's because they have a mental health condition that would qualify them for accommodations, they can get documentation of a mental health issue that would require them to leave campus and then work through the student accessibility services process. I will say that many cases that we're hearing do not appear to have that kind of documentation. If you have a schedule that is fully remote, you can request an exemption and move home. The issue is with students who have in-person classes or they have mixed classes with in-person components. If that's the case, then I strongly advise that a student who is truly struggling to stay here, visit your student services office and your dean's office. Please talk to people about your needs and consider whether you can continue the full semester. If, for example, you have 2 or 3 remote classes, you may be better off moving home and continuing just with those 3 classes. That can alleviate stress. I recognize that for many people that seems like very extreme, but we're in a situation in which for some people that is the way to have a successful semester, and that's okay. And I know that the folks in your dean's office have the experience to be able to talk through that with you and help you make the right decision. I will also say there was a question in there, Gary, about what to do, what services are available to students who have fallen behind. Maybe you've been stressed, maybe you've been distracted. Your first step is to contact your faculty. Ask to meet with them in their virtual office hours. Explain to them where you've fallen behind. Ask their advice for catching up. Ask whether they offer extensions. Be proactive. We also offer free subject area tutoring, free study skills tutoring at the tutoring center, and we also have undergraduate writing tutors who can help you with written work if you need to make revisions, if you're struggling to get started on a writing assignment. Those appointments are available too. All of that is free. So again, the supports are there to help you to catch up, to have a successful semester. But the first step for a student is to reach out and to get connected with the people who can help you make those moves for yourself.
So I want to ask Michelle if she would talk to information about vaccinations a little more.
Sure. So the state is working on its timeline for vaccines, and they will continue to use an age-based timeline, and they plan to lay out their whole timeline very soon. And so once we learn that, people can start thinking about dates and times, and we will continue to support the state in helping however we can to get shots in arms, is how they phrase it. So once we know more, we will let you know more. And I think it would be great to get as many students as possible vaccinated as quickly as possible, and fingers crossed that happens quickly.
So I think what I want to do, those of you who have been doing Zoom meetings, GoToMeetings, and other things over the last year know that sometimes systems work great. Other times they don't always work as perfectly as they should. And as you know, questions can be posted, published, and then I moderate them. I seem to be having problems with the questions, so I want to see if Erica, if you would take over reading the published questions for us.
I'm happy to do that, Gary. Let's see. I'm seeing a question that reads, thank you for reevaluating the suspension policy. Have all suspensions handed out this semester been reverted, or do some students remain suspended? How did you handle students who had been suspended a week or more before the change in policy? I'll go ahead and answer that one. We are supporting the re-enrollment of students whose suspensions were revised to remote completion of the semester. The re-enrollment process is fairly quick, and as the person who asked the question pointed out, there may have been a lag between the time that the student was suspended and the time that they have been re-enrolled in classes. What the support around that looks like generally is on a very individual basis, working with the student and their student services or dean's office and the faculty members whose courses the students have been re-enrolled in. I do also want to say that the number of students impacted was very handleable on an individual level. We aren't talking about dozens upon dozens of students. And so while each student impacted, that was a big impact for each student. Those students are really being prioritized for support and service as they re-enroll. There are some students who remain suspended. As we mentioned earlier, there were some egregious violations of the Green and Gold Promise, and so there are a small number of students who will remain suspended. In general, though, students originally assigned suspension, if their sanctions were revised, they were revised to remote completion of the semester. If the original sanction assigned was remote completion of the semester, those students are now able to complete the semester on campus if they choose to do that. And on campus, they will have some of those sort of first order sanctions, things like fines, education, and so forth. Let's see, another question. You mentioned that there are no multi-households allowed to gather. However, Governor Scott made that change last week. Gary, would you be able to address this?
Certainly. So last week, the governor announced changes to the guidance around households gathering. We're looking at that, and we're looking at options for us on campus. But as I pointed out early on in the presentation, we are continuing to see an increase in the number of positive cases. So we don't feel at this point that it's a safe thing for us to do to relax that. We are considering options. If our numbers demonstrate that we feel it's a safe thing to do and we won't risk further spread, we will make that decision in the coming days.
Thank you. Michelle, I have one for you next. The person says, my kid recently had COVID. Are kids who had COVID able to do anything than those who have anything with those who haven't had COVID?
Yeah, I think they're referring to, people who have been vaccinated are being allowed to gather with other households who haven't been vaccinated. So they're getting there's some benefits that people who have been vaccinated are being allowed to have. And for the most part, those have not been yet extended to people who've had COVID in the past. I think there's not the immunity is not as well studied in people who've had COVID versus people who've been vaccinated. But there is one benefit, and that is if you've had COVID in the past 90 days and you're exposed to somebody who tests positive, you don't have to quarantine. That's right now about the only benefit.
I have a follow-up for you, Michelle. Another person is asking, can my child come home for Easter and return without quarantining if we are all vaccinated?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on what kind of travel you have, and I think if they, it's not considered an essential purpose. So if your child is not vaccinated, they would still have to quarantine when they came back because they're going to be in an area outside of Vermont.
Thank you. Gary, a question for you next. Will there be winter and spring break next year?
We are planning for the traditional academic calendar like we've always had. We have no indication from the state that we will either need to modify the academic calendar around Thanksgiving. As you know, we closed right before Thanksgiving and didn't open up until February 1st. There's no indication that we're going to have to modify our winter break schedule or spring break or the fall break at this time. And we'll be starting at our regularly planned time in August.
Thank you. Another question here that's getting a lot of love, so I want to read this one. The first year students have not had a typical introduction to UVM. If things are more normal next year, do you plan on creating some programs specifically for them as they missed all of the typical fun activities around orientation? I'll address this. While we don't have specific programming plans created yet for next year, I can tell you that this year's first year class is very, very important to prioritize because of all that they have missed, not just by way of orientation, but we know that many of those defining life moments, leaving high school, graduating, going to prom, and certainly college orientation, we know that these are moments that this class didn't have the chance to experience. And we have already begun talking about ways that we can honor and boost and bolster this group of incredibly resilient students as soon as we're able to do big gatherings and special programming. I have a question about athletes. The person is asking, how do you justify the non-compliant behavior of student athletes? The pictures online are discouraging, given the restrictions on the rest of the student body. Gary, would you be able to speak to this?
Sure. I feel like I'm going back to the same point about our guidance. So when we set out to do winter sports, both our conferences, America East and Hockey East, and our ski conference had specific guidelines that we had to follow in order to compete. In addition, the state of Vermont set up very specific guidelines on what our teams had to follow in order to compete. One thing that's very distinguishing difference about athletes on campus, if they're in competition, they have to test 3 times a week. And it's scheduled so that it's timed close to if they're traveling out of state for games and in and around games. I will talk with our athletic staff tomorrow. I have a meeting with them and talk about some of the issues I've seen people have posted online about behavior.
Thank you. Raf, a question for you. Do you have to sign up for a move out time, or can you just plan on your own, or can your parents help you move out?
Good. That's sort of 3 questions in one, but good ones. So the first one is we will not have assigned move out times because we're asking folks to really stick to the expectation of departing 24 hours after your last exam. Hopefully the distribution of the exams, or what we expect is that the distribution of exam times will allow for enough space so that folks can exit and depart in a timely fashion and not all at once. According to the governor's guidance and the governor's plans for opening and closing safely, parents are still not allowed in the building. If that changes, we will be sure to let folks know.
Thank you, Raf. Jay Dickinson, a question for you. Are the faculty making accommodations in grading given the stress and disruptions like quarantine that students have been dealing with?
So whenever in any semester, when a student has a particular challenge in their life and they're working with their dean's office on that, faculty are notified of that, and they're asked to be as flexible as possible with students for making up missed work or exams, perhaps some flexibility with attendance, whatever is suitable given the needs of that student. So again, when a student is in quarantine, their faculty are notified that not that they're in quarantine, but that they have a reason to need flexibility by the dean's office. And I know that faculty are doing their very best to assist and accommodate students in making up work and in other ways. Grading is always up to individual faculty. They have grading policies of their own and they follow those. My experience in talking with faculty is that they are trying their very best to help every student have the most successful semester that they can.
Thanks, Jay. Gary, another question for you. Will a pod system ever be introduced?
I would say we're considering it, but I think with the size of our campus, a pod system is a little bit of a challenge to implement. I think what we're looking at is expanding the number of people that can be visiting in a room rather than a pod system.
Thank you. Raf, another question for you. The questioner asks, why is it that Res Life staff can fully enter my child's suite without advance notice when nobody else is allowed in? It sends mixed messages to the students and totally stresses out my student.
Yeah, so residential life staff could enter a space for any kind of health and safety and or maintenance issues. We often frequently do this. It's part of the housing terms and conditions that students sign. Really, what we do is we have a protocol for entering a space that requires us to knock and announce ourselves and make sure that folks know that we're coming. Additionally, for this time around, for our room verifications, we send out an email to students allowing them to know and giving them a heads up they will be entering the space, just so that we wouldn't cause any additional stress. That is quite frequent, quite normal for residential life to have the capacity to enter a space. We don't use it normally or typically, so that's why we went out and gave folks a message about the situation. So apologize if that caused additional stress. Residential life staff or any kind of emergency staff can always enter a space. That's a little bit of a different parameters. They have to wear the appropriate PPE and the appropriate supplies to enter any space. So that's why they're able to enter. And it's a little bit increased PPE or personal protective equipment that they need in order to enter a space than a student would typically wear, which is only a face mask.
Let's stay with you for another moment, Raf. There's a question. I've been waiting to be moved through trading spaces, which for folks who may not know is the process by which students can move rooms. I've been waiting to move through trading spaces this semester and it's taken a long time. Is there a reason for this?
Yeah, I talked about it a bit earlier, and it's probably something to do with the frustration that the last parent had. It had to do with the fact that many students, while they were trying to trade spaces in the beginning, were finding that their room that they were supposed to go into was either not vacant because someone else had moved in, or there was furniture disassembled because a student or a resident turned it into a single. So that's why we had to go ahead and do the room verifications to make sure that the furniture was in place, that the rooms were ready to receive new students. So that delayed our trading spaces process by at least a week and a half, and that's why it's going so slowly. Right now, we're trying to get through the backlog of folks who have been offered a space, but we're not able to move into that space. So once we get through that backlog, we'll go ahead and move forward and continue to make some new offers.
Great. Yeah. Gary, another one for you. Can an on-campus student travel within Vermont?
Yes, if you're talking about traveling around Vermont, yes, you can.
I'll just add I'll tack on a question that may be part of what the individual was trying to ask. If a student, if their family lives in Vermont, may they go home to visit and then return to campus without quarantining?
That's a little tricky because, again, what you're doing at that point is you're combining households. So you would need to plan to quarantine for that. Now, if the household has been vaccinated, that's a different story.
Gary, let's stick with you for a question about gatherings. Can you clarify how gathering in the hallway of a residence hall is better than allowing a couple students masked in the room? Could they leave the room door open and remain 6 feet apart? Hallway gathering seems like it would be more likely to be crowded.
So I'd have Raf speak a little bit to hallways, but again, hallways are transient. They're not long gatherings. They're not for extended periods of time. I pass in the hallway. There are common areas on the floors where people can gather. In that earlier question, we said, can I play cards with my friend? Yes, you can, 6 feet apart. Same thing with the hallways. You're masked, you're physically distant, you're okay. When you get into a room, it's impossible to do that 6 feet physical distancing for that extended period of time. So it's the physical makeup of the space that guides what's going on there.
Thank you. Raf, the next one is for you. The question is, why was Harris Millis the most patrolled building? Many other students did not experience the crazy patrolling that Harris Millis did, which I know was very stressful to the Harris Millis community.
Yeah, I think, as Michelle pointed out earlier, we had a track record and a large increase in numbers of student gatherings, but also student gatherings that led to positivity rates. And we're finding, as we conducted community walks, that there were quite a number of large gatherings, and our conduct data and our incident reports indicated so. What we wanted to do was to make sure that our staff were in those spaces, connecting with students, making sure that we discourage any large gatherings, because as we know, at that point in time, I think one of the data points said about 40% of folks in gatherings or close contacts were testing positive. That's a big point of concern for us in our ability to keep the hall safe, to keep the building safe, and to remain open.
We have a question here asking, will vaccinated students still have to test? If yes, can you explain? I see that Dr. Pavla is typing to answer that question, but I do just want to say right now, vaccinated students do still have to test. Next question. I'm going to apply for honors college and would love to live there. I've already been placed in a regular dorm. Can I change to honors if I'm accepted? Raf, this sounds like one for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to be extremely transparent, a number of students have employed that strategy of applying to honors college in the hopes of possibly living in University Heights North. So given the number of folks who are interested in possibly doing that, it probably won't be likely. There is a possibility, but that's all space dependent. So it depends on how many vacancies and spaces they have in the honors college. I'll be honest, they don't tend to have many. They tend to have all their students come back and stay in the building for quite some time.
Thank you. Next, may 2 students eat takeout food in a common room? Gary, can you field that one?
Again, 6 feet apart. Yes, they can. We have spaces in tents that are very much like common rooms. Other areas on campus, you know, you drop your mask while you eat, you put your mask back up 6 feet apart. Yes.
Thank you. Let's see. Has the university been lobbying with other institutions of higher education in Vermont for a vaccination program for college campuses? It was tremendously disappointing that UVM staff and faculty were not included in the group of educators who are now being vaccinated in the state. Why were higher ed staff and faculty not included in that group? Gary, do you want to answer that?
So I'll answer both parts of that question. Yes, we have been advocating for vaccinations for our students. We're hopeful that that may occur before the semester ends here, but collectively our higher ed institutions meet every other week. The presidents and other leaders from those institutions meet, and we have been advocating to the Vermont Department of Health to do that. I would say that the reason why they were not included in the recent expansion to include K-12 teachers and staff in there, and I note that students in the public schools were not included in that vaccination program, just the staff there, is that the state has had a very clearly stated 2 primary goals for its vaccination distribution. First and foremost was reduce the mortality rate. So they're targeting at high risk people. And second was to reduce the risk of serious illness. And again, they've done a very deliberate strategy of working with an older population, working down in increments. They're at 65 and above. Then they expanded to people with underlying health conditions. Initially at I think 55 and above, they've now increased that. But one of the main reasons why they moved for the K-12 teachers and staff, many on this call have children that are learning at home right now. At the same time, they're juggling work, and they know how difficult it is. Several of our presenters are in that situation and know that's challenging, to having to be work remote from home while also trying to attend to maintaining school situations for their children. If we're able to reopen the schools, enable students to get back in the classrooms, it'll help with the work situations with many of us that we're trying to deal with, balancing those two very specific needs.
Thank you. Raf, a question about summer housing. It says, I'm taking a summer course on campus. Will I be able to have on-campus housing? My class starts just after the current semester and ends in early June.
That's a great question. So the university has decided to not offer any summer housing. We are limiting any housing on campus to anyone who has an emergency need to live on campus. And that typically, as we've done in the past, is going to be to folks with extenuating housing circumstances, and also our international students. So those are the folks for whom we are limiting on-campus housing for during the summer. This summer is going to be a huge transition as we begin to prepare our spaces in our buildings to resume some sort of normal operations post-COVID for next year. And for that reason, the university has decided that it will not offer any on-campus housing.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm seeing a question that's getting a lot of likes. My son feels he does not know exactly what the rules are now and is afraid to be suspended, not only from housing, but rumors are around now that kids are even being suspended academically for mask violations, such as wearing it but below the nose. This is sounding a bit militant. I'll try to address this. So what's allowed hasn't changed. The Green and Gold Promise that students and faculty and staff have all agreed to has been consistent throughout the course of the semester, and the activities of daily living, eating, circulating around campus, going to classes, being in the library, study spaces, tents, Davis Center, these are all expected activities. With respect to masking, it's very important to protect the health and safety of the community that students wear face coverings and that they cover both the nose and mouth. Suspension, so I think this is the question is around suspension. Students are not being suspended now for a first-time Green and Gold Promise violation. We do reserve the right in the case of very extreme violations, egregious violations. It is possible for a student, but a mask slipping below the nose is not an egregious violation of the Green and Gold Promise, especially for a first-time violation. So, and I also want to say there isn't housing suspension as one suspension and academic suspension as another suspension. Suspension is a separation from campus and with it from academic activity. We do have, specific to the pandemic that we're in, we do have a new category of sanction which would involve separating a student from campus but allowing them to continue courses remotely. So that may be where the question about housing versus academic is coming in. But we consider that a different level of a sanction. Again, they're not two separate sanctions. I hope my answer was clear. It was a kind of a complex question. Let's see. Here's someone asking, John Paul, this is going to be for you. For my mental health, I really need a real break, but can't go home. On reading and respite days, I end up just doing homework. I'm reaching burnout. What are my options besides talking to a counselor?
Well, I would say if the student's feeling burned out, I would also want them to be talking with their academic supports in their dean's office about how they, what might be some strategies to manage that situation. That would be my first recommendation. I think I think this also gets into that territory of, using some of those self-care strategies. We know that all work and no breaks is not, not conducive to, we all have our limits around how much time we can spend studying and doing work. And so, I would encourage that student to utilize some of the, many activities and programs. But once again, I think if a student is not getting some academic flexibility from their faculty, then it sounds like they would want to be talking with their dean's office around how to negotiate that. And that's exactly what those staff are here for.
Thank you, John Paul. Let's see, our next question. What are the rules for on-campus students gathering at off-campus apartments? Can they do so if they're masked and stay 6 feet apart while together? Let's see, does someone want to unmute and answer this question?
So I'll take that question. And again, it has to do with the current definition of households. And I just want to remind that while the governor announced on Friday the changes for Vermont on household, the specific guidelines for higher ed were not issued until yesterday. So currently we define a household as an individual room in the residence hall or an apartment off campus. And what the guidelines for the state say are that 2 households cannot mix. So currently they cannot. We're looking at changing that, but right now with the current caseload of positives on campus and again off campus, we're putting a hold on that.
Thank you. Our next question is, I recently had 2 men from Res Life enter my suite without even knocking first. The green and gold promise states that no person other than my suite mates and I may enter the suite. What does UVM have to say for itself in this instance? Are staff not required to sign the green and gold promise? Rap, did you answer this one already?
I did, and I talked about the health and safety exception to that and the fact that our staff are servicing these spaces and the buildings and do have the both the ability and the responsibility to enter spaces to perform just necessary work. And in order to enter those spaces, they have to don some enhanced PPE in order to do so and do so safely to keep you and us safe.
Okay, great. Stay close, Raf. I have another question that may have in part a Res Life answer. The question is, does anyone check up on students that have had COVID after they're released from isolation to see how they're doing?
I think I can answer that. And we don't actively follow up with students who end their isolation, but offer them resources should they have any concerns or if their symptoms start to get worse. We have a lot of numbers and places for them to reach out if they need help.
Erica, from time to time, we do hear from parents who just want to get a hold of us and just want a little bit of additional check-in on their students, particularly students who have been in quarantine or in isolation and may be readjusting. So it's not uncommon for parents to reach out to Residential Life and say, hey, this is a circumstance, this is a student's experience, could you do an outreach? And we have been doing those as we hear from parents.
That's great. I also want to mention that students, UVM is stacked to the rafters with people who want to support you, and so you only need to let us know. Your advisor, your dean's office, student services, everyone in Res Life, everyone who you connect with in all sorts of ways, please let us know how we can support you. You don't even need to know what kind of support you need, just that you need some support from us, and we will work really hard to be there with you and for you. The next question, without summer housing, it makes it hard for out-of-state kids to take required summer classes. My son has a class that is only offered in the summer, and we're expected to find off-campus housing for 4 weeks. Raph, do you want to take this?
I would defer to Jay. I'm not sure if the classes are offered remote or not remote, but I think that would be probably the best option. I don't know what that layout and the delivery method of the class is.
The next question, if our student had a non-egregious, innocent testing timing violation very early last semester, how can their record be cleared? I can answer this. We are not holding last semester's green and gold promise violations against students in this semester's sanctioning process. Someone says, I know plenty of students who were suspended on their first offense. You need to define egregious. Someone was suspended for going to the bathroom without a mask at 3 a.m. I don't have the website for our Center for Student Conduct in front of me, but perhaps someone can chat it can publish it into the chat for attendees this evening. We do give examples of what egregious and non-egregious green and gold promise violations can look like. It's not an exhaustive list. It's intended to be a helpful resource to give you some sense of where different violations might land on the spectrum of egregious to non-egregious. Suspended for going to the bathroom without a mask on at 3 a.m. I will say candidly, sounds like there may have been a little bit more to know, because that would have, if that was a first time green and gold violation of a non-egregious nature, I would wonder what else might have been potentially happening. Let's see. Will Trek be offered for this year's freshman class? We are in the process of planning, and we know how much Trek is, gosh, I mean, Trek is a wonderful part of the first year student experience for those who are able to take advantage of it. It's a program that takes place prior to the start of classes in August. And we are looking at that right now, really with an eye on very much hoping to make Trek happen, and announcements will be forthcoming about that and other pre-semester programs. Let's see. Raf, one for you. My daughter received her 10th choice for her fall housing. She did not specify a roommate and feels this is not fair. Is there a reason she can't stay in the same dorm? Who can she reach out to about her situation?
Absolutely. Yeah, so in the housing selection process, all the spaces are up for grabs, making staying in place a little bit difficult. However, our trading spaces process, which will open in mid-April through May 5th, will be an opportunity for her to explore a different learning community where she might just enjoy better than her 10th choice. So we didn't have many students placed in the 10th choice, but we did have a few, and it doesn't feel the greatest. So I definitely acknowledge that. My recommendation would be to stay tuned and to be flexible about what other options may be. I talked a bit about, for example, cultural crossroads being subscribed or oversubscribed. If the student, if your daughter was interested in the learning community and submitting a trading spaces request, if they were to submit cultural crossroads, probably not a good likelihood they'll end up there because it's already so oversubscribed. So just be a bit more flexible. Feel free to give us a call, send us an email. We can help you navigate the trading spaces process. Erica, there was a question that I think I meant to pass off to Jay that was probably a bit cut off regarding summer courses and delivery method. And I think Jay was going to speak to it last time.
Go right ahead, Jay.
Yeah, so I think the question was actually about summer housing. And as Raf had said previously, we simply are not able to offer summer housing this summer. There may be other opportunities for a sublet or other housing available in Burlington this summer. The vast majority of summer classes that we are offering are available online. There is a select number of lab courses that do have an in-person lab component because those departments felt like they could not offer their class and give students the full experience this summer in that intense short period of time without having in-person labs. So it is unfortunate that there are there may be a case where someone would like to take that class on campus here. We can't offer summer housing this summer, but the vast majority of the classes that we are offering, over 300 classes, are available fully online.
Erica, I might recommend that folks check out our off-campus and student relations website. There's definitely resources there. Our students often have a longer-term lease that they try to bridge. So as Jay mentioned, subletting is often always an option around here. And there's also some other affiliate housing which may be an option for folks to consider.
Thank you both. Next question. This one is going to be for Gary. Ski club buses are an amazing resource, but they do put kids in a closed vehicle for over an hour. Why can't those same kids hang out in a student's suite or in a car, masked, windows down? It doesn't quite make sense.
So thank you. So our ski bus program was developed following guidance that was issued by the state about occupancy on congregate transportation, buses, trains, and others. So we took that information that the state had, adapted it to our use on campus, and the buses have limited capacity spaced out on those buses.
Thank you. And Gary, stay close. I'm going to follow up on the question about whether you can play cards. The answer that 2 students can play cards masked is inconsistent with the 6-foot requirement. This is confusing. Help us understand this.
So I think what we said early on is they can play cards, but as strange as it may be, you have to be 6 foot physically distant in a common area. So if you're in a lobby in one of the residence halls, if you're in the Davis Center, you just have to maintain that physical distancing and you can do it. And you're masked.
Thank you. Let's see, a recent, and let's see, this will perhaps be John Paul or Michelle. A recent article in the Vermont Cynic talked about students having COVID, being isolated with almost no mental health support. Can you comment on this? They can't go out because doors are locked and they can't get back in. Are you aware of this? Sounds like that's a 2-parter. We've got a mental health piece and then sort of a building lock question.
Yeah, I can start and say that the students in isolation have the same access to CAPS and student health. We do telehealth visits. CAPS does telehealth visits for mental health. They can get an appointment the same day, just as any student outside of isolation can. Student health is also doing telehealth visits. There's virtual programming, a ton of it through Living Well and Campus Rec, and that is all accessible virtually. So they have access to all the same resources. The doors are locked. We have temporary cards to get back in, and we do allow students in isolation and quarantine to get fresh air and within a limited space around the area, walk alone, 6 feet from anybody else wearing a mask. So I'm not sure what the situation there was. I don't know if John Paul, you have anything to add to that.
Michelle, I really think you answered it. The key is that we want students that are in those spaces to utilize the same services that are available to all students, and that's that's part of the reason we've been so flexible with all of those features being virtual through telehealth. So.
Great. Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question, and Gary, I'm going to put this one to you. It says, we admire the job you've done in managing through this difficult time. Rather than cause stress, issue suspensions, and create limits which are difficult to comply with, why don't you just make the decision to go remote for the last 2 months? It's not ideal, but wouldn't that solve everything?
So, very good question. Last year this time, in the days leading up to our decision last week, I was part of the group that wrestled long and hard with that decision. And it was not an easy decision we made. And we realized it came with a great deal of difficulty for everybody, for our faculty, for our staff, and our students. It was not long after that the state issued the stay home, stay safe order, and we didn't have much of a choice, but we finished out the balance of that term. You're right, it would not be ideal. In some ways it would be easier, but I think one of the things that we have heard over and over again from our students and from our faculty and staff is that UVM is a very, very special place. And it's a place, and people want to be here. And I've heard some wonderful stories from students who have done some amazing events outside of the classroom, have had some phenomenal experiences inside the classroom. And I think we have worked very hard, all of us at UVM, including our students, to create that environment that is safe, that is as best possible stress-free, but that we can we can have that UVM experience that is so special that we all love in these tough times, knowing that the end of this all is within horizon, within our eyesight. So sure, it would be easier. It would make all of our lives a lot simpler, not having to manage all the various issues we have to do with having all the restrictions on campus. But I really think that if I were to ask the vast majority of students where they would rather be, I think they'd want to be right in Burlington, right at UVM. So with that, and again, I apologize for the technology challenges tonight. I want to thank Erica for stepping in and emceeing for me tonight. It has been great to be with you again. I want to remind you of our next session will be April 15th. We will continue to communicate. One of the feedback that we have gotten from folks is we appreciate the communications that have been going out, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to keep you updated and informed. We do our best to any communication that we send out to students. We also copy to families members as well, so that you know what's going on. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. It was great to be with you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.